Okay, so now that we've talked about the scientific stuff, we can jump into the really fun magical stuff. We're going to talk about Lemuria first, then we're going to talk about Atlantis, and then we're going to talk about Egypt. Okay, but now that we understand there's a lot of cycles happening that are facilitating all of these crazy things, let's talk about what it even just looks like on Earth during a golden era. Okay, so each golden age is very different, like I said, so I do want you to know that they're not the same. This is not a prediction of our future. And again, check out that astral journey, New Earth. It's called Astral Journey to New Earth, to get a glimpse of what we're connected to right now. Okay, what's to come for us. And I connected to the timeline that we're on. What's the new Earth look like? Can timeline shift? Yes, but currently there's a thing, that an event that you can watch that describes the new Earth as it stands. Okay. So Lemuria. So who here feels like a connection with Lemuria? If you feel like you've been to Lemuria, pop in the chat that you feel that you've had a lifetime on Lemuria, or you feel some deeper connection to it. I feel like a lot of people here are going to feel that way. And I want you to know that Lemuria has another name that people call it by, and it's called Mu, just Mu. So if you hear of a civilization called Mu, that's Lemuria. Okay, so they're the same thing. And so if you feel a connection with either one, then I'm talking to you when I talk about this. Okay, so Mu, or Lemuria, was a supercontinent. Okay, that golden era just happened to coincide with a supercontinent time on Earth, and it made it so extra potent and beautiful. It was a great paradise-like island. Okay. And the ocean was one great ocean, right? So there was just one land and one ocean, and it was so powerful. And these were two powerful worlds that actually worked together, and they respected each other. They had a lot of like sacred respect for one another. Okay. So the beings of the oceans also grew into, Melissa, did you have something that you were wanting to say? I just noticed that you unmuted yourself. Did you want to share something?
Oh, that was my fault. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I was trying to fix my...
No worries at all. I actually encouraged people, hey, go ahead and unmute yourself if you don't want to type it in the chat. So please feel free if you want to. You are welcome to. Okay. That's why I was like, oh, do you want to say something? No worries. Okay. So I'll just keep going. So anyway, the two worlds that we're talking about is the land of Lemuria and the ocean world of Lemuria. Very different, but also working together. Okay. So two powerful worlds working together. The beings of the oceans that we currently know, they grew into these highly advanced, intelligent beings. They also grew into the crystalline versions of themselves, just like we did as humans, and we are as humans. So it's not just us that's changing, okay? These ascension energies, the rising frequency, the solar flare blasts, the Schumann spikes, the everything that we're experiencing is creating crystalline beings for humans, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the planet herself. Everybody rises together. Okay, so it's not just you that's getting more spiritual. All of life is getting more spiritual and more connected to source and more connected to their own oneness. And it's a beautiful thing to witness. You're on Earth at such a crazy time. So the ocean was revered during Lemuria as being she was revered for her power, her strength, and considered sentient, which means intelligent, has a soul of its own, and very sacred. So, and then the land was considered a conscious, sentient being and sacred as well. So the plants, the animals, and the humans all viewed the ocean as having a spirit and the land as having a spirit, right? Like that it was like these beautiful, spiritual, powerful beings. And they worshipped, they respected, they worked alongside this power. So the civilization of Lemuria lived in balance and in harmony with these two forces, which means that everything that they created was in balance with nature, not against it. So when they were creating advanced healthcare or advanced medicine, it was coming from the land. It was coming from the ocean. It was not inorganic. It was coming from what was available, and it was more powerful than what we have now, right? Because the land was also in a higher frequency and the ocean was, but because there's so much that Earth has to offer for medicine that has either not been tapped into or has been hidden from us. And that won't be the case in these civilizations. It will all be, the oneness will be everybody's helping each other, and there'll be no secrets like that. So the healthcare, the medicine, it came from the land. It was organic. The structures that they used to create their buildings were made from renewable resources. And the technology in quotations, was also energy or organic. It was very much like crystals, seeds, these kinds of things were used to carry frequency, messages, information. If you wanted to send a message to someone on the other side of the world, it was just the other side of the island, which wouldn't be as far. And it could be carried by like letter to that part of the great island where they resided. So in a way, it feels simplified, like it's almost going back, but it was like very powerful, very aligned with the divine feminine energy that Lemuria was. She was a matriarch. She was divine feminine, and it was very different than the world that we live in today. The trees and the plants, they were all connected to the one spirit of Gaia, and she communicated through them with her people. So, Gaia being able to communicate with you through the trees, through the land, through the oceans, sending you vision, sending you healing. She was very active and very communicative and very much working with people individually and as a whole. And they saw her intelligence and they saw the proof of her. And that's where like it's magic and miracles, right? And it was I will say it was a lot more slower paced. The civilization was so much more slower paced than what we have now. It was that divine feminine and very spiritual time on earth. It was a time of oneness. It was a time of ceremony. There was a lot of ceremonies and rituals of worshiping the land and the ocean and Gaia. And they also worked a lot with their ancestors. So there was a lot more of that working closely with their ancestral spirits and honoring their families and their ancestors. Okay. So I'm just popping back into the chat to see some questions that have popped up. So we've got a question coming from Ruth. The change to the golden era, is that the reason why it is now a safe time to be a healer, and why now we are not being persecuted for it like before? Absolutely, Ruth, you're really onto something here. The rising frequency, which is very gradual, creates a more open connection with each other, with God's source. The healing, energetic healing that you would be able to access now is more powerful than what you would have been able to access 1,000 years ago or whatever. Like, it gets more powerful. It becomes more available to us. And because of that, it almost calls to us. Right? We get called by Gaia and the nature spirits and the healing and all that. And you are more powerful than somebody would have been 1,000 years ago. And that will continue to grow. Mount Shasta, Kate is saying that's the exact feelings that the site evokes. The plants speak to you there. Ooh, I have something coming up about Mount Shasta. You are so tuned into this, Kate. I love that for you. Okay. So when we talk about where Lemuria is now, remember that. Okay. So during the central time of Lemuria, so that peak at the center of the photon belt, like that really peak, few hundreds of years in the 2,000-year period, that really, really central time of Lemuria, when it was at its peak, humans were at their peak. And so because of that, their health was at a peak. They began to live longer and longer lifespans, hundreds of years, right? And they grew taller. So the people of Lemuria, they were much taller than we are. They were much stronger in their bodies than when we are. And they all shared the same skin tone on this island, which was a dark golden skin tone. And I just thought that that was really interesting and something to mention. It kind of brings that feeling of oneness in as well, if everyone has like a lot of the same energy and frequency. And the separating of the continents is where we see a lot of different cultures and stuff like that. So they did not have seasons. They just had this really tropical environment. And I want you to think of the movie Avatar as something that, I mean, obviously they weren't blue though, but think of the movie Avatar, but more humanoid, not the feline beings that Avatar was, the way that they lived, the way that they worshiped the forest, the way that they worked with the land, the way that they were more advanced than humans in that movie, even though humans thought they had all the technology, the way that they were more like connected to spirituality, to each other, the way that they were healthier, taller, lived longer, stronger, all of that is like Lemuria to me. Like it gives me that same understanding of Avatar. Okay. So also during Lemuria, there were benevolent Arcturian and Andromedan groups that would visit the humans. Okay, so disclosure was open, and they knew about it. And these galactic beings were drawn in by the peace and the love frequency. But they made their visits infrequent because they wanted to allow the organic development of the society without their interference. Because as soon as you start visiting like a society, you're going to bring in your own ways. And they didn't want that. They wanted the Lemurian people. They saw that they were really onto something beautiful. And so they would do little visits, but they wouldn't stay because they didn't want to influence it in any way. They wanted it to be the beautiful thing that it was going to be, or that it was always meant to be. And so they allowed that organic development of that society. And then in the water, which was its own world, right? The ocean was one big world. In the water, there were a lot of like Syrian beings that would visit. There's a lot of water worlds. There's Sirius. I think it's Sirius B might be the water world. There's a Sirius A and a Sirius B. One is a water world. One is a like canine energy, and one is like a water world energy. So I think it's Sirius B that's the water world, and they would visit the oceans, the realms of the oceans. Now, some of the aquatic beings from Sirius were welcomed to stay if they chose to do so and to join in to the Lemurian civilization, and many of them did choose to do so. And so you could think of that as being like any aquatic being, dolphins, whales, mer people, aquatic things that we don't really know of would look really different. And those beings, the historical or ancestral DNA lines of those beings still exist on Earth from Sirian in our oceans. And we really have not explored our oceans and the depths of our oceans and truly what's all there. So we really don't know, but there's a lot in the oceans that is very galactic or very prehistoric. And we would be so shocked to see that that's the same planet we live on. And it is, and it's so crazy. So Keegan saying, I feel like the Polynesian culture is the remnants of Lemuria. Yeah, maybe. There's a lot of indigenous cultures, though, that might have that same feeling to them. Polynesian definitely has the tropical island vibe for sure. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share about Lemuria. As the natural progression of that planetary cycle, that 26,000 years took hold, and Earth came to the outer edges of the photon belt, as if it was when it started to leave the photon belt, there is a collective frequency dip that happens. We can't stay in a golden era because of this cycle. We hit it 2 times, right? We've talked about there's 2 periods of those 2,000 years, but there is an inevitable leaving of that energy. And as soon as you get to the edges of it and you start to leave that photon belt of light, the frequency does dip. And when that frequency gradually begins to dip like that, that's when Atlantis rose from what Lemuria was. Okay, so let's talk about that next shift. So we'll go into Atlantis now. All right, let me see if there's anything I didn't see. No, I think I've seen all of these comments. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to Atlantis now, and we're going to talk about how did that rise from Lemuria? What caused that? I mean, obviously, on a zoomed out greater scale, it was the frequency dip. You know, if we can't stay in the photon belt and we're on this orbit, our whole solar system, not just Earth, our sun too. Our sun, just so you know, when our sun goes through the photon belt, she is ascended too. She is an ascended version of the sun that we have. And she is now preparing herself through these solar flares, right? So if you as a human are experiencing ascension symptoms and a rising frequency, so is the sun. She's also preparing and moving into the photon belt like a sentient being, also going through an ascension. So is every planet in our solar system. We're all going together through the photon belt of light. Okay, so let's talk about then when we started to leave that photon belt of light. That's when Atlantis rose. Okay, she rose from a descending frequency and the energy that that brings. And so what that looked like was the minds of men began to stir and murmur in the direction of power, science, technology, and progression for the sake of progression. And there was this murmuring or this dissatisfaction that got louder and louder, dissatisfied with these natural organic ways and craving this more scientific, technological, progressive society. So it got louder and louder, and they became at first a very secretive group, these complainers, these dissatisfied people. And egos were coming back online. Okay, so we kind of like lose that in the golden era, and we're seeing our egos get quieter and quieter, aren't we? But then they come back. And so as the egos come back into play, because this Earth is a school and she's on a cycle of learning, right? There's a reason why you join Earth at the time when you do, depending on where she's at in her cycles about what you're learning. Egos come back online, and now we're in Atlantis with all of these egoic energies. And the rise of the toxic masculine energy that we see a lot still prevalent now swept over this planet, one small group at a time. And the industrialization of Gaia, her resources, started to take place. So not worrying about renewable anymore and really industrializing Gaia as not being a sentient, beautiful being, as being something to harvest. That started to take place again. And in order for them to build materials and construct skyscrapers, cities, flying vehicles, inventions, and all of those things. So they built a great city powered by solar power, crystal power, which is still better than what we have now. And there was this sudden interest from the Greys. So all of a sudden, the gray aliens perk up their interest in Atlantis. They're like, ooh, this is my kind of energy. Science. The Greys love science and inventions and progression. They love all of that. And so suddenly there's interest from them poking up in the Atlantean civilization that was rising. And they contributed to Atlantis many scientific inventions and blueprints, things for them to try and to build. And what started to happen as a natural experience of leaving the photon belt is that lifespans began to deplete. The lifespans started to get shorter. And this was a natural effect. It wasn't anything that they did wrong. It was a natural effect of this lowered frequency. Leaving the photon belt creates like personal shifts in consciousness and frequency. And what that contributes to is a less healthy body physically, and it contributes to shorter lifespans. And that leaving the oneness and entering into the energy of like separation and division also contributes to a shorter lifespan. So there was like all of this concern and worry and stress from these elites that started this Atlantean civilization, that their lifespans were getting shorter. And it was very concerning to the elites that were in charge of kind of like the formation and the founders of Atlantis, basically. So what they started to do was, and this is where we're going to really see the fall of Atlantis now, is what we're talking about. What they started to do was they began unnatural and unethical or unethical scientific and medical experimentation. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like. And I want you to know that if you were involved in any of this in Atlantis, you're kind of going to feel this, whether you were a victim of it or whether you were a creator of it, you will kind of just get like a feeling in your gut around this. Okay. So one of those experiments was to move a soul. Okay, so taking a soul from an older elite where their body was breaking down and they were coming to the end of that lifespan, which they thought should be longer because maybe it used to be for their ancestors and for, even their immediate like family right before them, and they're seeing that lifespan shorten, and they're kind of panicking. And so they start to experiment on taking their soul from their older body and inserting it into a younger body, thus taking over that younger body. But that younger soul was still inside of that younger body. And what happened was they would have to find a way to contain the younger soul somewhere in the body, trapping it, being trapped inside yourself. Okay. And as the other soul, the older soul that was inserted, came to the forefront of the consciousness, the one that ruled that body, they began to live life in a newer, fresher, younger body. But the trapped soul was this unwilling participant, and usually like pulled from families in Atlantis that had no power or wealth or influence or reputation. Right? So it's like pulling young adult bodies, or however young I don't even know. Like that's another whole question. Like maybe they even did it to children. Like it got more evil as it went along. And these kinds of like experimentation, a lot of this, these inventions for these kinds of instruments that they would use, a lot of it came from the Greys, or at least was inspired by things that they shared with them. And it's dark technology, right? It's very, very dark technology, but you can see little slivers of the truth in movies and in stories. And this kind of shows up here and there in movies and shows and different things, doesn't it? And if you've studied anything to do, alien technology, if you've studied anything to do around like reptilians, right? There is a technology that they use to take over bodies still happening today. So this would be like not as powerful as what I'm talking about in Atlantis, but like a version of that. Okay. So it's really, really dark, and it's really sad. And what it does is it steals someone's free will. It steals their body, it steals their life, but they don't just die and go in peace. They're trapped in there. They're trapped in there the whole time. Right. And where they're taking these people from, it is truly fucked up. I know Laura's saying that's truly fucked up. Totally agree. Okay. So the people that participated in this cruelty, are now dealing with dark trauma, dark karma. They're dealing with dark karma that they have to work to clear before they will ever be able to ascend higher than Earth. So there are many people now, good people, beautiful people, that when I look into their Akashic records, just a handful of people, I've seen this, they had a hand in this. And they would never, ever even think about doing something like that now. But millions and millions of years ago, when they were in this Atlantean civilization, and they were, kind of coming out of that golden era into this darker age, and the ego came back online, it took over, right? Think about how different that would be. Like, we're on the other end of that. We're seeing our egos get quieter going into the golden era. But what if you were on the other side of that and you only ever knew a golden era of love and light? And then this ego energy started coming in. It might possess you more easily or take over more easily because you weren't used to having to fight back against it. But regardless, there's people that have participated in that are on Earth now, and they are really working hard to clear this karma, because it absolutely will hold them back from being able to ascend anywhere higher than Earth. Like, they can't pick a lifetime higher than that until they kind of pay back this karma. And the way that they do that is through a lot of like forgiveness, self-forgiveness, and moving through these egoic urges that would have them craving youth forever, or power, or what influence, or whatever it is in them, right? Keegan, that is such a great point, that the elites that run the world today could definitely be reincarnated from that. It makes so much sense to me. That's the same kinds of energies. I think a lot of people would agree with you on that. Okay, so let's talk about something a little bit lighter. That is also Atlantis. So Atlantis had some lighter, fun stuff too. So they had this lighter, more playful scientific program, which was DNA splicing. And this was willing individuals. So willing individuals would take on animal-like qualities, and it became very trendy and a sign of social status to have the features of like a doe, like a beautiful doe on your daughter. So imagine having like doe ears, doe eyes, the little doe markings, or even the nose of it, or having for your daughter maybe feline features that you've chosen for her through this DNA splicing, or for the boys, strong horns or exotic eyes or the mane of a lion. It was all carefully chosen before birth and added into these petri dishes with the embryos of the rich and powerful parents. So think Hunger Games. Like, you know how weird the Hunger Games, like, I forget what their central capitals, I think it was just called the capital. All of those people were really strange and had like very outlandish ways of fashion and all of that. Kind of think that crazy energy of the elites being like that. So not really harmful, but very eccentric and very interesting. So I've definitely seen that too when I go and I look at Atlantis. So another trend that could be done at any age. It didn't have to happen at, as the embryo stage. Something that anybody could do and more people could afford, like all of the different classes could afford this, and you could do it as an adult or whatever, was, so at any age for far less money, was AI additions. So adding in artificial intelligence additions to the human form. So enhanced eyes, maybe that see in the dark or farther distances, or built-in computers, weapons, and other enhancements were definitely prevalent in the Atlantean time. Okay. So as the Atlantean cities began to grow and grow and grow and take over the earth, there was this smaller group that remained in the Lemurian frequency. And we're not down for any of this. And they communed with Gaia and they asked her for help. Where do we go? Help us. Like, we know that this isn't for us, and we are still in the Lemurian frequency. And that's a powerful advanced soul that can stay in a Lemurian higher frequency when the frequency of Earth descends. Can you stay in a personal higher frequency? It can be done. We've seen examples of like maybe Jesus or Buddha or all of these different things where somebody comes with that pure frequency, even though around them it's not. They can hold it in. That's an ascended master. They can hold it, a higher frequency, in their body and in their consciousness, even when around them it's not, right? So that's very rare. But there was a small group of Lemurians that didn't succumb to the lower frequency, even though the planet was moving downwards, and didn't succumb to the egoic kind of stuff. And so they didn't know where to go or what to do. And so they communed with Gaia and asked for help. And she opened up to them, showing them a path to inner earth. And so inner earth, somebody brought up Mount Shasta earlier. That's definitely one of the main sites of like the inner earth civilizations. In inner earth right now, and I don't want to jump into like, I could talk a whole video about inner earth. I actually have a whole video about inner earth. You can find that on my YouTube channel under the playlist Meet the Cosmos. There's an inner earth whole video about it. That's a very Avatar vibe. Inner earth. They have the bioluminescent plants that glow at night. They have these beautiful, tall, strong bodies. They live so much longer. There is a whole civilization in inner earth where these ancient line of Lemurians still exist today. So isn't that so beautiful? Brian says, I went there in Atlantis, no big deal. Yeah, I forgot you had a lifetime that came through where you visited inner earth, didn't live there, but visited there. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So that's just like mind-blowing about Lemuria. I didn't know that before. I was doing a lot of channeling for this lesson, and that came through, and I was like, I stopped typing. I was like, what? Lemurians still exist today, and they're in inner earth? I've always just thought about the inner earth civilization as, I don't know, just that they just are there. I never thought about that they maybe came from the surface originally, especially during the time of Lemuria. So how cool is that? Okay. So as the frequency during Atlantis continued to diminish, the further away from the photon belt that Earth traveled, the more sinister these Atlantean intentions became. Yet they had great power. Remember, they had all of this intelligence and all of these technologies and inventions and the grays, and they had a lot of power, and a lot of power with evil intentions is very, very dangerous. What they did was they set their sights on time travel. Okay, wait, I have a question here. Laura's asking, wait, so do the beings who live in inner earth also go through the high and low frequencies during the cycles of light and dark? Probably, but maybe not to the extreme degree of the surface dwellers. Like the surface dwellers are out in the open to that frequency. And in inner earth, they're held in the heart of Gaia. And so they might have it on a more subtle degree that they go through their own. I'm sure they do. We're all going through cycles, but it's not the same. And inner earth is more of that ascended master frequency of these beings that are able to hold a high frequency even when everything around them gets dark. And that's very rare. Okay, so it would be like a much smaller civilization than on the surface. Okay, so I want to talk about these sinister Atlantean intentions where they have all of this great power, and things start getting darker because the frequency, the moving away from that photon belt, it's like it's like something that you can't stop. Like I said, that journey can't be stopped. Well, the moving away of the photon belt can't be stopped either. It's going to happen. And it teaches people, like the Earth School that it is, very great lessons. So these sinister Atlanteans start setting their sights on time travel. And they decide that they are going to travel to other timelines, or you could call these parallel universes. It's really just a timeline that's parallel. Timeline, universe, world, realm, it's kind of all a lot of the same thing, but the parallelness of it. So they set their sights on traveling to these other places, which would have made them unstoppable, right? If they start traveling, what's going to stop them from taking over like the whole universe? Basically, it's going to make them unstoppable. And it's also going to destroy these other worlds by disrupting their timelines. You can't just disrupt a timeline and think that it won't fall apart and that it won't crumble when it has this unnatural, inorganic stuff entering into it. And timelines are very protected. There's actually a whole council, a timeline council, that is their whole job. And they come from all timelines and realms, and they come together, and their whole job is just to protect timelines and the natural organic progression of them, and allowing people to live through these natural cycles, because it has to happen that way, and you can't disrupt it without great catastrophe. So what happened was Gaia was made aware of this. She's made aware of the dark intention to start traveling through time, and as well as these higher galactic councils are made aware of this. And together, Gaia and higher councils of light from the Milky Way, together they ensured the fall of Atlantis. They made sure that it fell. So these galactic forces worked with the power of inner Earth, where Gaia exists, to trigger the elemental cycle that creates the separation of the supercontinent. So that volcanic forces or the oceanic forces or whatever Gaia does to separate a supercontinent, she triggered that. She's like, okay, it's time. So she triggers this, and the great supercontinent of Lemuria, which had turned into Atlantis, started to break apart. And as the supercontinent broke apart into smaller pieces of land, as it started to do that, so it breaks apart from the supercontinent, and then they drift away from themselves in these smaller pieces, which we call continents. Atlantis fell into the ocean. And so that you can see in so many different fairy tales, storybooks, movies, from Disney to scientific explorations to geologists, from every kind of storyteller and scientist, this comes up, right? That there are ancient civilizations at the bottom of the ocean. Okay, so Atlantis fell, right? That's what happened. So now we're going to talk about Atlantis fell, and what rose from that was ancient Egypt. Okay, so let's talk about Egypt. For anybody that's been waiting for this beautiful Egyptian energy, here we go. So the people were separated, obviously, the continent separated. Okay, so what was once a supercontinent for a long amount of time breaks apart. The cities, the great crystal cities of Atlantis and the great glass cities of Atlantis sink, fall, and are, kind of brought to chaos, and everything has to start over from scratch again, basically. Sorry, I'm just admitting somebody. Okay. So these people are separated, and much of that information is just lost. It's lost to time, to the ocean, to people. The information is gone. All of that dangerous amount of understanding of technology. I mean, only dangerous because of who it's in the hands of. Remember, technology is not bad. It's the intention behind who's using it that can be dark or sinister. Technology itself, AI itself, is not bad. It's what's behind it for an intention that can be dark. Okay, so we don't ever want to have a fear. And again, this is going back to the astral journey to New Earth, where you get a peek into the New Earth that's waiting for us. They talked a lot about warning people to stop all this nonsense fear around AI, because it's not dangerous. It's the intention behind it. Just like money is not bad. It's the intention behind it. It's a tool. It's a tool, and you can use it for good or not, right? Okay, so the people were separated, the information was lost, the further people drifted on these continents, now that we're drifting further and further apart across the world and across the planet, the more different the people became. And suddenly there wasn't this unification where they could all easily communicate, which was also a protective thing as they drifted. And over time, they developed their own unique languages, like the language of Atlantis was lost, the language of Lemuria was lost, and they developed these more regional languages, regional cultures. And Atlantis became a distant memory, just like Lemuria, even more distant, a story lost over time. Humanity broke into smaller and smaller groups or regions, becoming almost more tribal-like. And there was a constant warring that kept breaking out between these tribes. Okay, so now we're far away from a supercontinent and one civilization and cities and technology. And we've regressed into smaller regions with their own cultures, languages, skin color, with their own like rituals, ancestral lines. Everything's just so separate now. And then they start viewing each other as the enemy, which is what happens with separation, and they start warring, constant warring. And we see this in indigenous historical history, and the recounting of like what indigenous tribes have gone through with like the brutality and the wars and the different tribes of all around the earth. It was happening everywhere, not just one area. It was all over the earth. Smaller tribal kind of communities or regions that were constantly in war or in battle with each other. So the age of ancient Egypt was born through galactic interference. Because if left to their own devices, humans had really regressed and they weren't coming back from that. But beings from all over the Milky Way galaxy started making their way to Earth. Okay, so think Sirius, which would have been the water worlds, the canine beings. Think Lyra, which would have been the feline beings. Think Draco, which would have been reptilian beings. Cygnus, or what? So the constellation of Cygnus during ancient Egypt was called the Geese of Ra. They just called it that, and that was avian beings and like wetland beings. And then Orion as well. We see how the pyramids are aligned to the Orion's belt. Again, this was those beings that came. There's a mixed bag of beings on Orion. It's kind of like very Star Warsy with all of these different kinds of mixed beings. But they do have avian beings. They have like pig style beings. They have like all kinds of different animal beings, different kinds of humanoid beings, totally a mixed bag. Okay, Orion's like really interesting. So basically, these galactic beings saw this as an opportunity to help a regressed human species. So we had regressed. They wanted to help us bring back civilization. So they worked alongside humanity to organize themselves again back into a society that was larger, and to give them some kind of order, some kind of semblance of order and civilization, and also to show them how to build, how to even build again. You know, like we regressed so far, they had to show us how to even do that, like to build and to create buildings, cities, fortresses, agriculture, irrigation to make agriculture flourish, how to work together at all. And then they also these galactic beings brought in their own versions of spirituality to the mix, which is why ancient Egypt was such an interesting time spiritually, where there were so many different kinds of people either worshiping gods or pagans, or there was just such a mixture of what was going on there as well. Yeah, and they showed them how to build the pyramids, all of those things, bringing that together. Okay. So Ra, I got to speak with Ra during this incredible channeled lesson. And Ra is an eagle-headed being. And I believe that Ra came from Cygnus, and that's why they call that constellation they used to call it. You can research all of this, by the way, the geese of Ra, like geese, as in like goose, but multiple geese of Ra. That is what they used to call Cygnus. Anyway, so he came to Earth to be of service. He assured me of this. I'm going to be honest, I was pretty skeptical when he came through and wanted to share and was really looking for holes in his story, feeling kind of like he was one of those more selfish beings that was trying to take advantage of humanity when they were in dire straits. But he felt very sincere. And so I'm going with what that felt. But you obviously need to take everything that I say with a grain of salt and what feels true to you. But what he told me was that he came to Earth to be of service. He assured me that he has a shaman-like energy that I wasn't expecting. So like this shaman-like energy, this mysticism, somebody that can walk between worlds. So that's why there are stories of him from ancient Egypt where they talk about Ra traveling to heaven or the sun, and him traveling to Hades or the underworld, because the being Ra is able to traverse many dimensions. It's like he's not locked in by frequency, almost like an ascended master that I was talking about, where he can go to the heavens or the grand central sun, or he can go to the underworld, like the lowest dimensions, or what they called Hades. And he can travel all of these and bring back information or stories about that. And you can see in ancient Egyptian art and storytelling, that is what they talk about, and they considered him a god. So he shared this information of how the universe worked, how dimensions worked, how souls worked with these humans. And many of them took it very literally and created a lot of like superstitious beliefs. So superstition arose from these humans being like mind blown about the things that Ra was sharing and these other galactic beings were sharing. And what came from that was a lot of superstitious beliefs that we still have today. So many of these galactic beings were benevolent. Like Ra says, he was a helper. He was here to be of service. However, humans turned them into gods in their eyes and turned them into something to worship. And that wasn't necessarily their reason for coming, and that wasn't really even what they wanted, was to be worshipped or considered gods and goddesses. They came to be of service, and yet you'll see that they worship them as deities in a lot of their ancient Egyptian art and culture. However, not all of these beings that came were benevolent or good or to be of service to humanity, because some of these selfish galactic beings saw that as an opportunity. They saw that humans were craving a higher leader. They wanted a leader. They wanted a god. They wanted someone just to tell them what to do, basically. And so these good benevolent leaders were like, no, we're going to teach you how to do it for yourself. Here's agriculture. Here's this. Here's all the information about souls. Like, help yourself. That's why we're here. And yet these other beings that were selfish had this other, like, they saw this opportunity to rule, to take, not to give, to take, and to be rulers. And instead of popping in just for visits here and there, the way that the benevolent beings did, where they would leave and then come back and leave and then come back, these more selfish galactic beings set up camp, and they stayed on Earth. Okay. Especially when they came from places, Draco, where they did not have any influence or power or resources, from like overpopulated constellations where they were maybe the small fish in a big pond kind of thing, and they wanted to be the big fish in a small pond, that whole energy. So a lot of them really took advantage. They declared themselves gods. They turned humans into their slaves. They started ruling like kings and queens and gods and goddesses, and their rule created these damaging social class systems that created separation once again in humanity. Because in ancient Egypt, there was no middle class. It was the rulers, like the rich, and the slaves. And there was this horrible separation where they hated each other. And that began with these selfish gods creating slaves, creating separation between classes, declaring one class to be poor or not worthy, and then saying, oh, these people born of these bloodlines are worthy. And it just creates so much separation and hatred, and now we're sinking even lower in our frequency, right? It's very damaging to humanity and to society. And so the humans that were looked upon favorably, the rich ones, the lords, the ladies, the like the political leaders, whatever it would look like, the army rulers, like whatever, these ones that were looked upon favorably by the gods or these galactic selfish beings became their right hand helpers. So they worked right alongside those gods, and those gods made them into pharaohs. They made them into royalty. They made them into leaders of armies and more. And the women that were considered favorable or beautiful were given to these galactic beings as treasures or property. And they were given to them like a gift, and in some cases, a sacrifice. All right, so it starts to get really dark. So we're seeing these beautiful women given as a sacrifice, like a blood sacrifice, especially virgins, or we're seeing see them being given to these gods as gifts. Like, here, do what you want with this beautiful woman. And there was some interdimensional beings that actually were breeding with humanity through these gifts, whatever. And this interdimensional breeding had very mixed results. Sometimes it was a disaster, but sometimes something strong came from that. And, that's where we're looking at like legends of half god, half human. I forget what those are called, but in Greek mythology, if anybody knows, pop this into the chat. There's this being that's a half god and a half human in Greek mythology. It looks like Brian knows. He's helping me out right now. I can't remember what they're called, but there's all of these stories about giants, these half gods. And this is where a lot of this is coming from, right? Demigods, maybe. Laura's saying maybe it's demigods. Potentially, yeah. That is centaurs, yeah. Oh my God, yeah. Like really just Nephilim, yeah. All of these like weird, this is kind of like the origination point of a lot of these things. Yeah, demigods. Everyone's agreeing it's demigods. Okay, cool. So, I want you to, I have this video. I want you to check out the artwork of ancient Egypt for proof of what I'm saying. It's wild, wild. You can literally see this played out in the art of Egypt, where you see a galactic being clearly standing beside a human, and then there's a child that's half and half. And I created a video called Ancient Egypt, same playlist. Go to YouTube, check out Meet the Cosmos. There are videos on Lemuria. There are videos on ancient Egypt. There's a video on Atlantis. There's a lot on there for you guys. So in the ancient Egyptian video, though, I share artwork. Like I shared like all of this different ancient Egyptian artwork for you to see proof of this. It's wild. It's wild. Anyway, I'll move on. But so these varied results of this intergalactic or interdimensional breeding program, this is not hybrid program. Okay, this is not, take the DNA and make something like the gray hybrid program or the reptilian hybrid program. There's different hybrid programs which are fairly positive. This is not that. This is not like, we take an egg and we make it the best that it can be. This is like hardcore breeding, and not generally, maybe not always like free will, like it's like against the will of these beautiful women in a lot of cases, because they were just given to them as property. In some cases, I will say I have seen when I look into ancient Egypt that there are times where the women were happy to do so because they worshiped them as gods and they thought that it was an honor, but there were other times when it was just not. Okay. All right. So let's move on from that download bombshell. But some of these half and half children really were strong, and they took the place of their parent god as ruler once they left, or ruled alongside them. Okay, so they were like this half and half creature. So the selfish, yeah, yes, Keegan, physical breeding. I'm talking about honest, like just intercourse happening. So the selfish nature of these gods could never create a unified Egypt. It would be impossible. And there was so much warring between regions within ancient Egypt itself. They could not create this unified thing that maybe the benevolent beings were trying to bring, like Ra. Instead, they started creating, going right, we're regressing once again. We're regressing once again. Okay. And within ancient Egypt's own walls, there was now regions that were warring. So like warring within their own people, because they created the separation where they hated each other. The class separation of some people were living in such extreme hunger and poverty. Of course, they're going to hate the people that have everything. And so there's all these wars that are starting to break out again. Okay. So the fact that they're warring within their own society weakens the ancient Egyptian empire so much that it fell to outside invaders. So there were these outside invaders, the Romans, the Greeks, that were constantly trying to take Egypt because it was such a powerhouse. And Egypt probably could have withstood that had it remained unified, but it started separating and breaking apart. And because of that, it weakened what they could have been, and they fell to the Roman Empire. Okay. So once Egypt fell to the Roman Empire, the stories of these Egyptian gods, which were galactic beings, and these Greek gods, which were galactic beings, Greece is a whole other story. All of those stories of these gods faded into the past as the world converted from paganism to Christianity. Okay. And then we have the society that you see today, which is what Christianity is fading now, but Christianity was extremely damaging to society and created all the wars as well. So we faded from gods and paganism to Christianity and the power of the church. And then we are where we are. So the last thing I want to talk with you about with you guys is what's to come. Where does this leave us now? What's to come? Okay. So for us, like our society, what's to come? So as we move further into the photon belt, we will start to experience these intergalactic interactions, visitations once again. Okay. But because we're on the side of the photon belt where we're ascending, entering into the high frequencies, and not on the side of the photon belt where we're leaving and descending frequencies, we're on the ascension path into a photon belt. Because of that, the interactions that we experience with these galactic beings will be loving, helpful, and in line with ascension. I can't speak for what's going to happen on the other side of the photon belt because it won't be like that. But we're on the side of the photon belt we're going into the good stuff. So any kind of galactic or extraterrestrial, any of that, visitations or interference or whatever, visitations, it's going to be beautiful and from love. Okay. So that's something that you don't have to be afraid of happening right now anyway. So I believe that as we move further into this photon belt of light, that the inner earth civilizations will disclose themselves to us, that they're going to come on up into the surface, and that they are going to have so much to share that we could not possibly understand, and that we will be learning from them, and they will almost be the leaders of this new earth, that they're going to step into that leadership again from a place of pure love and from a place of understanding what it's like to be on earth during that golden era, and help us, really, really assist us in getting there. The golden age that we create now, our civilization, as we create a new golden age, it's going to be totally unique to us, not a copy of any other civilization that I've explained today or that has existed at all in Earth's history. So the accounts that I've shared with you today about Lemuria, Atlantis, and ancient Egypt, this is really important for you to understand. What I've shared with you today about this information, it all comes from a timeline that was shared. So a timeline where one flowed into the next. Lemuria flowed to Atlantis, which flowed to ancient Egypt. It can be very confusing to hear different accounts with alternate endings. So, for instance, if somebody starts telling you, no, Atlantis didn't fall, okay, it's important for you to understand that many parallel timelines exist, and people that connect to a different timeline than the one that I described for you, you're always going to connect to the timeline where you had a life. Okay, so, oh, I lived on that timeline, so I can recount that one for you. And people connect most strongly with the timeline where they've had a lifetime. So if somebody says, no, my Atlantis didn't fall, I believe them. I'm not like, no, you're not, you don't know how to channel, you got it wrong. I'm like, ooh, tell me more. I would love to learn more about a timeline where Atlantis didn't fall. However, the timeline I've recounted for you is the most commonly shared experience for the humans that are on Earth at this time. So this is the most common that people will recount. So it's going to be like, you're going to see a lot of people saying, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, that's what happened. Okay. Because the people, the souls that are on Earth right now are the ones that were involved in those experiences. It means that they resonate really deeply with this information, and that they have a lot of karma and healing and trauma from it that they're working on healing. Okay, so they're working on healing the trauma and the wounds of those lifetimes right now. And right now, we're currently aligned to the ancient Egyptian energy frequency. So the wounds that are coming to the surface are very much connected to ancient Egypt and the timeline that I recounted for you. Okay, so I did like a quick little reel about what that is, and it's literally gone viral. It's crazy because people are so resonant with ancient Egypt right now that it just blew up. But the way that I described it in the reel is that 26,000 year cycle, that period, ancient Egypt was on a descension path, right? Because it was leaving the photon belt of light, but we're on the ascension path. We're going into the photon belt of light, yet we're parallel right now to the frequency. So where ancient Egypt was almost like the fall, we are in the rise, and we're like a parallel connection to ancient Egypt, but on the different side. We're on the ascension, they're on the descension, but if it's a circle, we're hitting where they were, like the hands of the clock are meeting. And then that means that what's to come is the frequency of Atlantis is next, which is the new Earth that I tuned into, that I keep mentioning that event. It was a city, it was very, very high tech, but because we're going into the photon belt, it wasn't filled with dark, sinister technology, experimentation. It didn't fall. It's going to be like an Atlantis that rises into a Lemuria. But again, we really can't compare because it's going to be what we make it. But just to give you an idea, the frequency of ancient Egypt, we're there rising. We're going to rise through the Atlantis kind of energy into a Lemurian energy through this golden era period, which is quite long. 2,000 years is like a really long time, right? So okay, so I'm going to answer a couple questions before we sign off. So I'm seeing Laura asking, do all the planets in our universe go through this cycle of light and dark? So I will say I feel that that is true, but scientists can really only measure like our Milky Way. And so our solar system, which is the sun and Earth and Mars and Venus, that solar system, it goes through that whole cycle. So if you weren't here on the call when I said the whole cycle, the whole solar system is on a 26,000 year circle that goes through the light and the dark and the light and the dark. Do other solar systems go through that? Well, scientists have proven that Alcyone, the star that we're orbiting around, that's in the middle of Pleiades, also orbits around the star of Sirius, and that Sirius revolves around something bigger, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like these cycles are huge, and you can see smaller cycles within the larger ones. We live in a small cycle that is living in a bigger one that's living, it's all overlapping. Did Avalon come after ancient Egypt? I always felt unsure about where Avalon hits in all of this. And when I looked at this, I think, Tiffany, you might not have been on the call maybe when I said this, but I explained that there was this micro continent that broke off of a supercontinent that was before the time of Lemuria that they considered Avalon. And so I would say it was way before that, way, way, way before, like much more ancient than even Lemuria. How far off time-wise is the new Earth? You could say we're in it now, and that it's not an end destination, that it's a living, breathing journey. Just like when somebody says to me, am I on my highest timeline? Well, we can work together to shift you into the highest self frequency, which means you're on it. And now every day things just get a little better and a little better, but you're there now, right? And so it's like, just, it's more about staying in the frequency than it is a journey to get somewhere with a destination. It's more about alignment than a destination. So we are aligned to the new earth. We are on the path in the photon belt of light. The further we move into it, the more new earthy it will feel, or the more golden era it will feel, right? And then I also have for you, if you're looking for more hard timelines, I have a video on YouTube that is called, what's it called? New Earth, New Timeline. I think that's what it's called. And it talks to you about 2 4-year periods, 2020 to 2024, and then 2024 to 2028, being very relevant when we're looking at, when is the purge going to end? When are we going to see the corruption end? When are we going to see like all of that ending? And so I'm just pulling up the video title for you. It's called The Great Awakening, New Timeline. So check out that video on YouTube for a timeline that's more specific. If you're looking for like a smaller cycle, there's a timeline that ends in 2028. And I think that's what you're asking. Okay. All right. Horatio asks, so what will be next? Exactly what I described and what's to come as we move further into that photon belt of light. We're going to start having these intergalactic interactions that are going to be really positive and beautiful. We're going to start moving beyond the ancient Egypt energy into what feels like this Atlantean, very technological, city-like energy. And then that will lead to our own version of what Lemuria is. But we are not copying those, and it won't be a mirror of them. And we really can't predict, because of free will and humans' free will. Every single time we get into a golden era, it looks different. Like it's not like Lemuria repeats itself. And so we aren't repeating. So it's really hard to say, right? Other than the event that we did, where you can go and check that out, which is the astral journey to New Earth. Other than that, no one can tell you for sure. You can't predict the future. That doesn't actually, fortune telling doesn't really work, because every little decision that people make shifts the reality. Because of free will, one decision I make could change my whole future, and nobody could predict that because they don't know what I'm going to do, because I have free will and every decision is so spontaneous, right? But you can get a really good estimate through checking out the video, The Great Awakening, A New Timeline. You can head over to my YouTube channel and check out the playlist, Meet the Cosmos, and read more about ancient Egypt and more about Lemuria. And you can check out within the resource section of our own membership group, the astral journey to a new earth, to see what's next, Horatio. Okay, awesome. Beautiful, you guys. So thank you so much. This was like, I know this is very different than our normal events. This is just me talking at you, but I hope that you learned a lot, and that, and not even learned a lot, really more what I'm hoping for is that this just opens your ability to wonder and to consider and to come to your own conclusions, and go ahead and research the terms that we use today. And, just really dream about this beautiful new age that's coming for us, and that we truly have moved into the photon belt of light, and that it just gets better, not worse, every year. Okay. Thank you guys so much for this incredible time. Thank you so much for all of your beautiful questions. And oh, good, Laura. I'm glad that you thought this was so much fun. I thought it was a lot of fun too. And I really enjoyed researching that and putting it all together. And I will let you all know when the replay is up inside the membership group so that you can watch it again. And feel free to share your experiences inside the group chat. Always get in there with your questions and your experiences. And thank you, Laura. She's saying the Meet the Cosmos playlist is the best. Thank you so much. It's my favorite playlist too, inside of YouTube. All right, everybody have such a great day, rest of your day, and rest of your week. Tomorrow is a full moon, you guys. Be gentle with yourselves. It's not just a full moon, it's a lunar eclipse. This is the energy of releasing. I also want to, if you're feeling a lot of these intense energies as eclipse season comes to an end, there is a video called Eclipse Season Grand Finale that just went live last Sunday on YouTube, and it was absolutely fantastic. So many people are resonating with it. You could also think of it as a May energy reading. So if you're struggling, go check that out and you'll feel less alone. Okay. Love you all so much. I'll see you all soon. Bye.